What if the God you've been praying to doesn't exist where you've been looking? What if the Guru you've been searching for is closer than your own breath? And what if the silence you've been running from is the only answer that ever mattered? In 1935, a man sat before one of the greatest sages India had ever produced, Ramana Maharshi, and asked a question that has haunted seekers for thousands of years. He asked, what is Guru Kripa and what is the Guru's grace and how does it lead to self-realization? The answer he received was so simple, so devastating in its clarity that it dismantled every assumption he had ever held about God, about the Guru and about himself. That answer is what the video is about. But I want you to stay with me because this is not a lecture. This is a journey, and by end of it, you may never see your little life the same way again. Because here's the thing, most spiritual seekers get completely wrong. They think the Guru is out there. They think grace is something you have to earn. They think realization is something that happens to you someday in the future. Every single one of those assumptions is false. And we are going to dismantle them one by one. Stay with me. Let me tell you about someone you probably know. He might be you. He did everything right. He studied hard, got a degree, built a career, found a relationship, collected the milestones. And one ordinary Tuesday morning, he sat in his office, looked out at the skyline he had worked so hard to reach, and felt nothing. Not sadness, not despair, something worse. Emptiness. The kind that hides behind accomplishment. The kind that polite conversation never touches. The kind that whispers in the 3 a.m. dark, is this really it? This feeling, this terrifying, inconvenient feeling, has a name in the ancient traditions. It is called the Vairagya, dispassion, disenchantment, the withdrawal of despair. And here's the thing that no motivational speaker will ever tell you. This feeling is not a crisis. It is an initiation. Ramana Maharshi described it precisely. He said that sometimes in a man's life, he becomes dissatisfied, not content with what he has, and he begins to seek the satisfaction of his desires through prayer, through God, through something beyond the visible. But notice the sequence. First, dissatisfaction, then seeking. The seeking begins with emptiness. And this is why most people are terrified of that empty feeling, because they don't realize it is the first knock of grace at the door. Grace does not begin when you find an answer. Grace begins the moment you realize you don't know the question. Now, here's the part that almost no spiritual teacher on the internet will tell you, because it doesn't make for a good weekend workshop. The path to self-realization is slow. Not because God is withholding something, not because you are not good enough, but because the mind, your mind, is not yet capable of holding the truth it seeks. Think of it this way. You wouldn't pour wine into a bottle still filled with old water. You wouldn't plant a seed in concrete ground. You wouldn't hold a mirror up to muddy water and expect to see your reflection. The vessel must be prepared. And this preparation, this purification, is what Maharshi describes in the opening teaching of his text. He says the mind is gradually purified until, and this is the turning point, the man no longer wants what he used to want. He still prays, but what he prays for has changed. In the beginning, he prays for health, for success, for a better job, a better relationship, a better body. And God, being compassionate, gives him some of these things. But notice what happens. Each desire fulfilled quietly births another. The hunger is never actually fed, only relocated. And then, for the rare few, something cracks open. The prayer changes. Instead of, give me what I want, it becomes, show me what is real. Instead of, remove my problems, it becomes, remove my illusions. This is the shift Maharshi is pointing to. This is the beginning of real seeking. You know, most of us spend our lives asking God to rearrange the furniture of our suffering. We want the same life, just without the parts that hurt. But a truly purified mind stops asking for better arrangements and starts asking, what is this room? Who am I in it? And is there a door I've never noticed? That question is the birth of the spiritual seeker. And it is in that moment, not before, not after, that grace begins to move. Now we reach the part of this teaching that will shatter what you think you know about the Guru. Because here's what most people believe. They believe that Guru is a person, a wise old man on a mountain, a teacher who holds secret knowledge, and if you impress him enough, he will finally reveal it to you. But listen to what Maharshi says. He says, and this is the one of the most extraordinary statements in all of spiritual literature. God takes the form of a guru and appears to the devotee. Listen to that again. God takes the form of a guru. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetry. This is a precise description of a metaphysical reality. The guru is not a man who became God. The guru is God who became a man, specifically, uniquely for you, in the form of your particular heart can receive. The Guru does not appear when you search hard enough. The Guru appears when you are ready. He is a story you will recognize. You are going through the darkest period of your life. Every door is closing, every plan is failing. And then from nowhere, a book falls off a shelf and opens to exactly the right page. A stranger says something in passing that answers the question you've been carrying for years. A teacher appears, a sentence, a song, a dream. You call it coincidence. But what if it isn't? What if the universe or God or the self or whatever name you give to the infinite had been tracking you all along? What if grace is not random? Maharshi teaches that God, who is immanent, takes pity on the loving devotee and manifests himself according to the devotee's development. According to your development, not your intelligence, not your credentials, not your accumulated spiritual merit. Your development, your readiness, your hunger. And the Guru, however he appears, comes not to add something new. He comes to remove what is covering what was always there. But here's the part most people completely miss. We'll come back to this in a moment. The Guru is both external and internal. This is perhaps the most practically important teaching in this entire text. And it's the one that separates sincere seekers from those who are merely collecting spiritual experiences. Let's break this down completely. The external Guru, the teacher you can see, hear, sit with, does something specific. He gives a push. A push. Think about what that means. Your mind, by default, always flows outward, towards screens, towards noise, toward other people's opinions of you, toward tomorrow's plans and yesterday's regrets. The mind is designed to run out. And the external Guru, by his words, his presence, his very being, disrupts that flow. He introduces friction. He asks the uncomfortable question. He creates the first moment of true inward stillness you may have ever felt. That is the push. But the internal Guru does something entirely different. He pulls from within you, from the depths of what you truly are. He pulls the mind toward the self, toward the still, silent awareness that was there before your first thought and will be there after your last. This is what Maharshi called Guru Kripa, Guru Grace. It is not the knowledge you receive from outside. It is the gravity you feel from inside. You think you are walking toward truth, but truth is pulling you towards itself. This is why surrender feels like relief. This is why sitting in a great teacher's presence feels like coming home. This is why sometimes in meditation you feel a pull deeper than thought. That pull is not technique, that pull is grace. Now, the Theosophical Society also sought masters. They meditated to find teachers in higher realms, and a devotee asked Maharshi about this. And his answer is startling. He said, "The master is within." Meditation is not meant to find a teacher somewhere out there in the astral realms. Meditation is meant to remove the ignorant idea that he is only outside. Think about that. If you believe the master is a stranger somewhere out there waiting for you to find him, then he is bound to disappear also. What is the use of transient being? But if the master is the self, if he is not something you reach but something you are, then he cannot be lost. As long as you think you are a body, as long as you believe you are separate, the master will appear as if with a body, because that is the form your mind can hold. But the moment that wrong identification dissolves, the master is found as none other than the self. We'll return to this because it becomes the key that unlocks everything. A devotee once asked the Maharshi a question that I think many of you are secretly thinking right now. He asked, how can the silence of the Guru, who gives no initiation, performs no ritual, be more powerful than scriptures? How is silence better than the study of sacred texts? It's a fair question. After all, we live in an age of information. We have more spiritual content available to us than any generation in human history. Podcasts, books, courses, retreats, YouTube channels like this one. And yet, the crisis of meaninglessness has never been more acute. The anxiety has never been higher. The disconnection that has never been deeper. Why? Because information is not transformation. Maharshi's answer is one of the most arresting things I have ever read in spiritual literature. He says, silent is the most potent form of work. However vast and emphatic the scriptures may be, they fail in their effect. The Guru is quiet and grace prevails in all. The silence is more vast and more emphatic than all the scriptures put together. But why? Because the scriptures speak to the mind. They explain, they elaborate, they describe. But silence speaks from beyond the mind. It does not explain, it simply is. And in the presence of that silence, the mind, for the first time, has nothing to grab, nothing to analyze, nothing to argue with. And in that gap, something opens. Words can describe the ocean. Silence drowns you in it. Let's talk about the thing nobody wants to talk about. The real obstacle. Not karma, not past lives, not insufficient spiritual practice. The ego. Now, before you roll your eyes, because the world has been used so much, it's almost lost its power, let me tell you what Maharshi actually means. He uses an image that is so precise, so visceral, that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. He says, the ego is like a very powerful elephant. Think about that for a moment. The elephant in the wild. Thousands of pounds of force. Unstoppable, unpredictable, ancient. And you, with your willpower, your good intentions, your spiritual practice, you are trying to control it. How do you tame an elephant? You can't outrun it. You can't reason with it. You can't contain it in a small space. The only creature that can make an elephant stop in its tracks is a lion. Not by fighting it, not by force, simply by its presence. The lion appears and the elephant, for all its power, begins to tremble. The Guru is the lion, and the ego, for all its thousands of years of accumulated momentum, trembles at his very look. Now here's what's important to understand. You cannot defeat your ego by fighting it. Trust me, millions of sincere seekers have tried this. They have practiced austerities, they have fasted and prayed, they have suppressed and controlled. And the ego, cunning as it is, has simply reappeared wearing spiritual clothing. I am so humble. I have meditated for 20 years. My ego is not smaller than yours. You see, the ego is the one trying to eliminate the ego. It's the left hand trying to cut off the right hand. The effort itself strengthens what you're trying to destroy. This is why Maharshi says something revolutionary. He says, "You will know in due course that your glory lies in where you cease to exist." Your glory, not your defeat, not your punishment. Your glory lies where you cease to exist. In order to gain that state, you should surrender yourself. And only then, the Master sees that you are in a fit state to receive guidance, and he guides you. Surrender is not weakness. Surrender is the bravest thing you will ever do. Because surrender requires you to admit, finally, completely, without argument, that you don't know. And in that not knowing, grace rushes in like water into an empty vessel. A devotee asked, "How is the Guru found?" And Maharshi's answer contains the entire map of the spiritual journey in just a few sentences. He says, God, who is immanent in his grace, takes pity on the loving devotee and manifests himself according to the devotee's development. The devotee naturally thinks that he is a man, expects a relationship as between two physical bodies. But the Guru, who is God or the self-incarnate, works from within, helps the man to see the error of his ways and guides him in the right path until he realizes the self within. Did you catch what just happened before? He said the Guru works from within, not from a podium, not from a stage, not from a YouTube video, from within. The outer Guru is, in a sense, a mirror. His function is not to give you something new. His function is to reflect you back to yourself, your confusion, your seeking, your readiness, until you see what has always been there. Maharshi gives us one of the most beautiful metaphors in all of spiritual literature. He says, the sun is brightness only, it does not see darkness. Think about that. The sun doesn't experience darkness. It cannot, it is its own light. And yet, you speak of darkness fleeing on the sun's approach. The darkness doesn't fight the sun. It doesn't negotiate. It simply vanishes. Because darkness was never a real thing to begin with. It was only the absence of light. So also, the devotee's ignorance, like the phantom of darkness, vanishes at the look of the Guru. You are surrounded by sunlight. But if you want to see the sun, you must turn in its direction and look at it. So also, grace is here, now, always. Not in some future spiritual state. Not after you have meditated enough. Not after you have read enough scriptures. Grace is here, right now. It is only found by the proper approach you make, though it is here and now. Grace is the self. That also is not to be acquired. You only need to know that it already exists. This changes everything. A devotee asks, will not Bhagavan give me some prasad from his leaf as a mark of his grace? And Maharshi's reply is one of the most quietly devastating things he ever said. He said, eat without thinking of the ego. Then what you eat becomes the Bhagavan's prasad. Listen to that again. Eat without thinking of the ego. Not eat a special food that a saint has blessed. Not perform a ritual to receive sacred power. Eat without the ego. Because prasad, the sacred blessed food, is not made holy by whose plate it came from. It is made holy by the consciousness with which it is received. This leads us to one of the most uncomfortable teachings in this text. Someone asked, is it not to obtain the Guru's grace that presents are offered to him? So the visitors offer presents to Bhagavan. And Maharshi, with his characteristic directness, asked, "Why do they bring presents? Do I want them?" Then he said something that sounds almost harsh at first until you understand it. He said, "Even if I refuse, they thrust the presents on me. It is not like giving a bait to catch the fish. Is it the angler anxious to feed them? No, he is anxious to feed on the fish." He's saying, when you give a gift to Guru hoping to purchase grace, who is using whom? Grace cannot be purchased, bribed, earned through ritual. And then another question about prostration. What is the significance of prostrating before the Guru or God? Maharshi said, prostration signifies the subsidence of the ego. It means merging into the source. But then, the line that should stop you completely. God or Guru cannot be deceived by outer genuflections, bowing and prostrations. He sees whether the ego is there or not. He sees whether the ego is there or not. Not your posture, not your words, not your years of practice. Whether the ego is there or not. A devotee asked about a brotherhood of invisible rishis, great sages who guide humanity from unseen realms. He asked, "Are you conscious of a brotherhood of invisible rishis?" And Maharshi, with a characteristic precision of his mind, replied, "If invisible, how can you see them?" The devotee said, "In consciousness." Then the master said, "There is nothing external in the consciousness." And then the question that contains the entire teaching. Can I realize them? Maharshi said, if you realize your own reality, then that of the rishis and masters will become clear to you. There is only one master, and that is the self. There is only one master, not the man on the mountain, not the teacher in the ashram, not the voice on the podcast. The self, your own deepest nature. The awareness behind your thoughts, the silence beneath your words, the witness that watches your dreams. That is the master, that is the guru, that is the God. And here is the final revolution of this teaching. If the guru is the self, and you are seeking from the guru, then you are self seeking itself. The seeker and the sought are one. So we arrive at the end of this journey, but not at the end of this teaching. Because the teaching, the real teaching, has not been these words. The real teaching has been the space between these words. The moments when something in you went quiet. When a sentence landed somewhere deeper than the mind. When, for just a fraction of a second, you forgot that you were watching a video and simply were. That was it. That was the grace. Maharshi teaches us that when the devotee surrenders completely, when no vestige of individuality is retained, all sense of self is lost. And then there can be no misery, no sorrow, no searching. Because the eternal being is nothing but happiness. And that comes as a revelation. You have been looking for the Guru in teachers, in books, in pilgrimage, in a prayer. And the Guru has been looking back at you from the inside of every mirror you have ever passed. You have been searching for grace as if it were a thing you needed to find. And grace has been carrying you this entire time. You've been asking, when will I realize the self? And the self has been smiling because it cannot not be realized. It is what doing the asking. There is no path. There is no distance. There is no separation. There is only this. Awareness, aware of itself. That is the Guru's grace. That is the self. That is you. If something in this reached you, don't rush past it. Don't immediately share it, comment on it, or add it to a playlist. Sit with it, even 5 minutes. Close your eyes, feel the room you're in, feel the breath moving through you, and ask, without reaching for an answer, who is aware of this? Just ask, and listen to the silence that follows. That silence is the teaching that no video, no book, no scripture can give you. Only you can give it to yourself. If you want to go deeper, the full text of Maharshi's Gospel is freely available. Read it slowly, read it again. And if this journey has been meaningful, share it with someone who is ready. Not everyone will be, but some will. And for those who are, this might be the beginning of everything.